Welcome back. I've got a special treat for you today. The treat is that this video isn't going to be done by me. I actually have a colleague of mine in China who is just at the Xpeng P7's media drive. Now, I was invited to go to the media drive, but obviously because of COVID restrictions and traveling, I couldn't make it. So a friend of mine, Mark Andrews, who's an automotive journalist stationed in China, agreed to do the test drive, record some video footage so I could put together this video and bring to you. I'm not going to go too far into what the review is going to be about. Obviously, it's a driving video about the Xpeng P7, which is the new all-electric long-range sports sedan by Xpeng. It's their second vehicle. They came out with the G3, which is a compact SUV, a couple of years ago. It sold relatively well in China, and the P7 is, there's high expectations for the P7. It's kind of like, Model 3 competitor. Although it's priced a little bit lower than the Model 3, it's not considered, say, a premium brand in China, Xpeng, but it is considered a brand that you get a lot of value for your money. Mark's going to go into all the details, the driving reviews, talk about the vehicle, so I'll turn it over to him. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody that, I've been putting out electric car driving reviews, range tests, and charging station reviews. I'll be doing more of those, so if you're interested in keeping up with what I'm doing here on the channel, please click the subscribe button below. Thank you.
This is Mark Andrews in Shanghai. I'm here today on behalf of my colleague Tom Malogny, who cannot make it here because of the COVID-19 crisis. Today, we're looking at this car here, the Xpeng P7. Now, this is quite an important car for Xpeng. This is their second vehicle, the first vehicle being the G3. Now, Xpeng is one of a number of different companies that has sprung up over the last few years in China. At one time, there was said to be over 400 electric vehicle companies in China. Many of these are startups, and a lot of them have produced concepts, but very few have actually managed to produce a production car or sold those in significant numbers. Even fewer have managed to produce a second production car. Now, there are three companies that have come to symbolize these startups. One that is very famous in the US is NIO, thanks to its stock listing, but there is also Xpeng and the German-sounding Weltmeister. Now, this company managed last year to sell 16,608 cars of their G3 version, which is a small SUV. Now, this is quite a change from the normal kind of cars that a lot of these producers are producing. First of all, most of them are producing SUV type vehicles or crossovers. This, as you can see, is not an SUV. It's what Xpeng describes as a sports sedan. And indeed, it does actually look quite sporty. Now, it has quite a lot of features. There are three main versions. There is a standard version, which actually Xpeng calls the long-range version, and there is a real long-range version, which has managed to produce quite a lot of headlines thanks to its 706-kilometer range on the NEDC. That is 439 miles. And that has managed to, that is by far the longest of any car currently on sale in China. And there is one further version, which is actually the version we've got here today, which is the performance model, which is an all-wheel drive version. Now, all the cars feature a 196 kilowatt motor on the rear wheels. That is 263 horsepower. Now, with the performance version, it adds a 120 kilowatt motor to the front wheels, which produces an additional 161 horsepower. With this car, we have a 0 to 62 mile per hour, a 0 to 100 kilometer time of 4.3 seconds, which is pretty competitive actually. It has tons of features. On the top of the range version, it has what's known as the XPILOT 3.0. This builds on the XPILOT 2.5 that is in the G3. The the XPILOT 2.5 is available on a lower spec version of this car, but the 3.0 uses the NVIDIA Drive AGX system, and that features a 12 ultrasonic sensors, 5mm wavelength radars, and 13 autonomous cameras. Now, let's cut the talking and let's actually have a look at the car. Now, one really cool function, watch this. Pretty dramatic, hey? Well, let's go in and take a look and let's get driving. What we've got here is what happens when somebody actually enters the car. So let's have a look. This is quite cool, actually. Lewis, do you want to open the door and get in? I don't know if you noticed, but in that corner, that little speaker just popped out of the dashboard, which is quite cool. Also, we have ambient lighting here going around the car. We can change that ambient lighting to different tones. Pretty cool. So the general driving experience is quite good. It's got good road holding. The steering is pretty responsive. It's pretty much you point it and it goes where you expect it to. Nothing particularly unexpected, although there's not a large amount of feedback with the steering. With this car, you've got pretty brisk acceleration. It does 0 to 62 miles per hour, 0 to 100 kilometers in 4.3 seconds, which is faster actually than the Tesla Model 3 in the standard all-wheel drive version, although not as fast as a Tesla Model 3 with the all-wheel drive performance version. And equally, it's slightly slower than the base models of the Porsche Taycan. 0.3 seconds to be precise, which I don't think many people are going to miss really. Anyway, I've just upped the regenerative braking, so it was on low earlier. I'm going to just accelerate it a bit, and then we're going to let the regenerative braking see what it can do. Okay, I'm taking my foot off the accelerator now, and we are letting the regenerative braking kick in. So there's a fair amount of energy being recycled from that. I've just had to put the brake on right towards the end when I got to that speed bump. That's one thing, of course, people have to get used to when they're driving electric cars, is the regenerative braking. Obviously with some cars it's stronger than with others. This actually has a fairly high level with the high, although I have driven cars that have higher levels of regenerative braking. So right now we're actually demonstrating the audio system. So this is a Dyne audio system. It has 18 speakers, and this car is actually specially designed around it, or at least the interior has been, to give what they call a concert hall experience. As you can hear, the sound quality is indeed pretty good. And also what helps is actually Xpeng has done quite a lot of work on the NVH of this car, so it's a pretty noiseless environment anyway when it comes to outside noise. One thing you will notice, if somebody's speaking in the car and you're outside and they put the windows up, you can't hear them from outside, which is pretty amazing actually. One cool factor is actually if you're driving along and you've got passengers with you and they're say wanting to rest, you can actually you don't want to fall asleep or anything at the wheel, you can put the sound system so that essentially it's just coming out of these speakers which are actually on your headrest as a driver, and for the rest of the car it's quiet, which is actually quite a cool feature and something pretty unique really. So here we have the Xpeng P7. We've driven it on various roads, given it a bit of going on the track as well, and we've tested it quite thoroughly. Now, a lot of people are saying that this is a Tesla Model 3 killer. Is it? Well, yes and no. There are certain similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. One of the major differences with this car is it's significantly bigger than a Model 3. In fact, it's much closer in size to Model S or a Porsche Taycan than it is to a Model 3. It fits in somewhere about 2/3 the way between the two, between the Model 3 and the Model S. Also, the price point is different. This is significantly cheaper. So in China, this starts at 229,000 RMB, which is $32,200. And it goes up to the equivalent of 49,000 US dollars for this version that we have right here, which is the performance all-wheel drive version. Now, Xpeng made a lot of headlines with its 706 kilometers NEDC range, which is 436 miles. Notice that is NEDC, it's not WLTP or EPA. It's got nicer proportions, it's got a kind of European flair to its design. Xpeng is marketing it as a sports sedan. And in fact, you got frameless windows on the doors, which is quite a nice feature. You've got a very nice looking interior. Maybe the material quality is not exactly premium, but quite honestly, you don't expect that for this price point. It's not necessarily a premium brand. That's not where Xpeng is positioning itself. It's positioning itself more as an electric car that is affordable by the masses, but it's not super cheap car, mind you. And this is actually a big step up from their G3, which was a significantly cheaper model. As we've seen, it handles really quite well. It's got a lot of really good features, such as the sound system, the XPILOT 3. These are all really good selling points. Is it a car that you would want to buy? Well, there's certainly nothing wrong with it, and for that kind of price, it's really difficult to argue against the car. It's a good car, it drives well. There is though a caveat in that when it comes to the range, there are 3 different versions. Xpeng called the long range, which is really just the standard version. There is a long range, which Xpeng calls the super long range, and there is, which we have here, the performance version, which adds all-wheel drive. Now, with the long range car, I'm calling it the long range car, which Xpeng are calling super long range. It supposedly has an NEDC range of 706 kilometers, that is 436 miles. However, that is actually only the standard model, which does not include the XPILOT. So there's 2 different versions, one with XPILOT 2.5, which is the version of XPILOT that is available on the G3, and this car, the top of the range car, which actually adds the XPILOT 3.0, which has far greater autonomous capability than the 2.5 version. Now, with the 706 kilometer headline grabbing model, that actually deleted the XPILOT systems as a weight saving measure, and also added a special aerodynamic skirt to the rear wheels and some other optimizations to squeeze out an extra 50 kilometers of range. So that's what, about 36 odd miles or something like that. So the actual version, the long range version, if you want to actually add the XPILOT, does 656 kilometers, which is 408 miles. Well, that is actually a slightly shorter distance than a Model 3 under the NEDC cycle, or at least that's what's claimed anyway. One thing to point out, with the Tesla Model 3 in China, it starts at 271,550 RMB, which is around about 38,000 US dollars. So actually this car comes in significantly cheaper than the Model 3 in China. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, what spec that Model 3 has in China, but I'm suspecting it does not have features such as the autopilot, and it's probably not a particularly long-range version. So certainly in the Chinese market, this is a much better value for money car. And this is really where Xpeng is actually positioning itself. It's a value for money brand. It's not necessarily cheap, but it's not necessarily premium. This, in many ways, is a car for the people, an electric car for the people, an electric car that is extremely livable with, very nice looking, and has lots of very useful and very good features.